So I grew up going to church. My parents were religious people. And I was 2 weeks old when my mom first took me to a church service. And from that time on, I went every Sunday. I went every Sunday evening. I went every Wednesday night. We were just there all the time. My parents were super committed, and just by default, me and my siblings were super committed as well. What's crazy is that, when people would talk to me about God at church, I would actually feel really uncomfortable or super bored. I really didn't know God. I had no personal experience with God. And, even like I was just around all of these people who were saying that they knew God, that they believed in God, that they trusted God, that they talked to God, and even some would say that God talked to them. And that was so way outside of my experience with that. I was just going to church because my parents made me. But I remember one summer when I had a serious crisis in belief, and all of my thoughts about God came crumbling down. My family would go on vacations to this little spot called Sunset Beach in North Carolina. And I remember that summer standing in front of the ocean, the first time I got to stand in front of the ocean that vacation, looking out at the expanse of the water, the beauty of the waves, feeling the tug of the tide against my toes, and just feeling this overwhelming sense of insignificance and smallness in front of the ocean. Everywhere I looked around me was water. It was large, it was beautiful, it was unknown. I couldn't see down into what was there, but it just stretched on and on and on. And it was at that time that I started asking questions in my heart about God. I asked myself, well, is there really a creator? And if there is, did he create this? And then I started asking deeper questions like, well, why can I only understand or experience God based on what God's created? Why isn't God involved with me right here, right now? Why doesn't God care about my story? Why is he just here to create this stuff and then move on? And so it created a lot of questions for me. These new questions I'd never really asked myself started to arise from within me. I'd come inside our rental home. I ate a sandwich and I decided just to turn on the TV. And so I'm watching Star Trek, and I'd never really watched Star Trek. And in this one episode, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, they end up discovering this planet. And on the planet, there's this cave. And so they decide to go and explore the cave. They walk into the cave and they see this large wall. And on the wall, there's almost like a movie screen, alive with light. And on this screen, there's a large man's face, a large face of a man with a beard. And he looks at these men and he says, "I'm the god of Shakari." He then demands their allegiance and a spaceship. So Captain Kirk does what any space explorer would do in that situation. And he simply asks this god of Shakari a very simple question. He just said, "What does God need with a spaceship?" I will tell you right now that what God the Shakari did there is he zapped Captain Kirk for his insolence because of his, you never question God, am I right? Everything inside of me when that happened, everything I believed about God, everything inside of my mind about God, every perception, every perspective, it just came out. First of all, I realized that what I believed of God looked a lot like the God of Shakari. I believed God was white, that he had a beard, that he lived somewhere really far away, and that if you crossed him or gave him any lip, he would zap you with electricity. He'd get you with lightning. He's always going to throw lightning bolts at you. But the second thing that really came out in that is that the God of Shakari was very limited. He couldn't get off of a planet. He needed a spaceship. And I'd always thought, like, if God is really all that big, if God created this stuff, if he really cares about us, where is he? Why is he so limited? And why don't we see him? And so it was that day that I realized the God I'd always believed in was really nothing more than something like the God of Shakari. It was just very small and insignificant. And it was that day that my belief in that God absolutely crumbled. My story doesn't end there, because it was shortly after that I went to this church camp, a summer church camp. My parents made me go, And I'll be real with you, I had a lot of fun. We ate ice cream all the time, we had pizza, we had burgers. I know I'm focusing on the food, but that's kind of how I roll. But then we also played freeze tag at night, and we played capture the flag, and we had water balloon fights. We just had such a good time. The only downside to it was that I had to attend church twice a day, which was a real bummer. But I will say this, is that I don't remember the name of the person who spoke about God during that week, but I will tell you, he said some of the most interesting things I'd ever heard about God. He started to say things that really had my mind turning and considering things about God that I'd never really considered before. Except for one night, as I was busy doodling or daydreaming or spacing out, who knows what I was doing, he said this one phrase. He said that eternity dwells in our heart. It captured my attention. I'm the guy who had stood in front of the ocean and had been overwhelmed by the significance and size and magnitude of the water in front of me. And one of the things that the man shared was this. He told me that like there's a story or a scripture in the Bible, like a passage in the Bible, this phrase in the Bible that says this. It says, "If you seek me, you'll find me, if you seek with all your heart." And there was something in me that knew I had to seek Jesus with all my heart. And so it was at that time that I stood up from my chair and I decided I was going to go down to the altar to talk to God. I'd never really prayed before in my life. I'd never really experienced him before in my life, but I was ready to experience Jesus. And so I walked to the altar and I just simply bent down on my knees and I started talking to Jesus. I asked him to remove the darkness from my life. I asked him to make me a new person. And I even asked him to forgive me. And this is what happened. For most of my life, I had felt like there was a blanket over my life, a heaviness. When I started talking to Jesus, that blanket was removed. The second thing that happened is for most of my life, I'd felt incredibly angry and hurt. And when I talked to Jesus, the anger and the hurt was removed. And the next thing that happened is all of the fear that I'd been carrying in my life and all of the doubt and unbelief about God got taken away. And what was placed instead inside of me was peace. I knew that I had peace with God. And it was at that moment that in my heart, I knew I'd experienced Jesus' life for the very first time and that he'd come and put his life inside of me. That he'd been speaking to my heart all along and that he'd been calling me to himself to experience him and to know him. And so that's how I first encountered God. It wasn't through religious routine or ritual or convention or culture. It was when I decided to open up my heart to Jesus and invite him to change my life. And he answered me. And I just wanted to share this story with you because I've had so many amazing stories and so many experiences with God, and my deep desire is to share them with you. So I'd love for you to leave a comment on this video, to subscribe, and to join me in the journey of sharing the things that I've learned. And my hope is that you'll be able to experience them as well.